Hello and welcome. Some 1.6 billion children around the world, of which about 250 million are in India, suffered from school closures in one way or the other during the pandemic. In some countries like India, the length of school closures was very high, almost 2 years, and in other countries it was much lower. The impact of those school closures or the assessment of the impact of those school closures are now being understood a little better. One survey, the National Achievement Survey done by the Government of India, has recently put out some numbers and insights as to what seems to have happened in this period. The survey was conducted in November last year, and it does appear, if one looks at some of the numbers, that the percentage retention, the education levels across the country has gone down, and perhaps more so in some areas and regions, and within that maybe some classes, particularly those where the survey was conducted. This particular survey touched about 3.4 million students in 118,000 schools in 720 rural and urban districts across the country. Delhi, for example, turned out to have be amongst the 5 lowest performing states for class 3, but interestingly enough seems to have done much better for class 8. Similarly, there were other insights on how between 2017, when the last survey was done, and 2021, the average performance came down from about 54% to 47%, and in class 3 language, in the language areas, from 58 to 52. So this survey looked at language, science, maths and social science. So this is a backdrop of sorts, but the question is in many ways, where are we going from here? This survey points to some of the problems and challenges posed by COVID and school closure, but that of course exacerbated something that was already in place or not in place. So to understand this better, I am joined by Dr. Rukmini Banerji, CEO of Pratham Education Foundation. Dr. Banerji is an economist by training and most recently won the IDAN Prize last year for her work in improving children's learning levels. Ms. Banerji, thank you very much for joining me. So let me ask you a broad question first. This study, the government's National Achievement Survey and your own ACER studies, what are they telling us at this point?
So I think, Govind, the availability of current information is very important. And I think there have been, over the last 10 years or more, these two types of information. One coming from ACER, which measures very basic foundational skills for all children. And then the National Achievement Survey, which is grade level and of course lower, but for certain grades. One is a household-based survey, one is a school-based survey. But regardless of the methodology or the timing, having current data as we go into the period after the summer vacations, being able to plan based on current data, I think is very important. Now, it is not surprising if schools have been closed for over 500 days that we should see a drop in levels if you compare class 3 or class 5 or class 8 from a couple of years ago, and now that the levels are lower, I think is not a surprise. Good data just confirms what that is. And I think you're absolutely right. All of this points to what are we going to do next.
Right. And, let me pick up on one or two points. I mean, the ACER study, for example, which looks at states like West Bengal and Karnataka. And this is just to bring people up to speed where, even with things, the way things were earlier. So 27% of children in class 3 could barely read class 2 text. As against 36% in 2018 and 33% in 2014. 48% of students in class 5 can barely read class 2 text, which means they've moved 3 years ahead, but essentially their learning levels are still 3 years behind, which in turn is a number that is down. So where do we really start?
So I think for me, the most promising thing in the last couple of years has been the new education policy. And the thrust in the new education policy towards ensuring foundational literacy and numeracy by class 3. Now, as you know, the policy is 56 pages long, but on page 8, there is a box, and I wish we could take that box and put it on billboards all across the country, which says that if we don't reach by class 3 these basic foundational building blocks of learning, of learning, then the rest of the policy is actually irrelevant. This is as loud a clear recommendation and a direction that we as a country could have. This was very important even before the pandemic, although the policy was released July 2020. But I think it gives us a very strong sense of what the priority should be as we move ahead. Now, if you go by the ASER numbers, which of course naturally I do, about a fourth, anywhere between a third and a fourth of children in class 3 pre-COVID were at that level, which means that we have to make a massive jump to take that number from 25, 30, 36% to 100% in the next couple of years. That must mean, for such a big jump, that everything that we do in the early years has to be rethought, restructured, and re-energized. And I think that, again, the new education policy gives a very important place for the fact that all this effort should start with pre-primary, so that you have 5 years to achieve this kind of a goal, 5 years in linear time moving forward, and 5 years for a cohort. And I think this is a challenge that we as a country must take up, and I think we can succeed.
Right. So if you were to look at this, the COVID period and what's been lost, and clearly even the data is saying that much more has been lost, should there be an attempt to recoup, or do you cut your losses in some way and then begin afresh at another point, hoping to recover later?
So I see us as having two major challenges right now. I mean, there are many more, but two big ones. One is the new cohorts that are coming in. So the cohort that is in class 1, class 2 right now has never had preschool, has had no school, and is literally straight coming from home into school. And, one could argue that depending on where you were, you probably didn't have much of, the normal childhood that children at that age have. So that's a fresh, brand new cohort. We should think of that as a NEP cohort. How do we take these kids and, in this, moment of rethinking how do we carry these kids forward? And how do we plan that every cohort that goes through from class 1 to class 3 or from Anganwadi to class 3 has a better experience based on the experiences we have every year? So that's challenge one. And I think there's been a lot of effort, Nipun Bharat, state governments. I think everybody's focused very much on how this can be done. The second one, I think that we are not talking about enough perhaps, is how do you help those who are past this class 3 stage to catch up? And that I think goes all the way from class 3 till much higher classes. I have a friend who teaches at college who says even college needs catch up, because this 2 years of not doing your usual things obviously has led to all kinds of, whether it's losses or you've learned other things or whatever it may be. And there, at least for primary schools, I feel like we have some examples that are worth following, so that these foundational skills that we want for our kids up to class 3, and we know from our past data that many didn't have it till class 5. This may be also the opportunity to ensure that we rebuild those.
Right. So if I were to now pick up a more specific illustration, so when you say experiences, what exactly could a school do, whether it's a rural school or an urban school, which could perhaps help bridge some of these gaps?
So let me give you an example of a state, because a lot of our decision making, especially for government schools, happens at the state or the district level. Now, one of the advantages of having data from the last, say, whole decade is that we can see that in a typical year, if I look at ASER data and follow cohorts who are moving from, say, class 1 to class 3 or class 3 to class 5 since 2010 onwards. Let's take Karnataka as an example. If I look at the past Karnataka data, on an average year, a typical year pre-COVID, you would see something like anywhere between 15 to 20 percentage point improvement in basic ability to read. During the COVID years, obviously it came down, and we did a ASER for Karnataka in 2021. But Karnataka government was actually ready with a program called Udu Karnataka, which means Read Karnataka. And I know about it because Pratham is a partner in that program, which is based on the quite well-known now teaching at the right level approach, which says regardless of what grade you're in, let us start with you, especially if you're in class 3 or above, at the level at which you are. If you can't read words, we start there. If you can't read letters, we start there. And we move you by your current level upwards to being able to read. Now, Karnataka was a state that was ready with this. They had done some of it before COVID. And as soon as schools opened in January, they moved into action, and they were able to get about 60 plus days of instruction despite Omicron before the summer vacation. And there what we saw is that in this period, as the schools are coming back into functioning, same teachers, same schools, nothing extra going in, they were able to actually pick up their children and move them well above 30 percentage points in this 60-day period. So natural, normal, average year gain is anything like 15 to 25%. Focus on building foundational skills, putting the curriculum aside for a couple of hours a day, and getting everyone to really help children can reap big results. So for me, that means that as a country, if we say, yes, we have a curriculum, we've got to get to it eventually, but let's spend the time as soon as schools open after the summer in really helping our kids, because there's nothing wrong with our kids, there's nothing wrong with our teachers. We have the time. As soon as you get towards 10th and 8th, there is high stakes. But if you're in class 3, 4, 5, 6, you have time. And we can do that. There are other examples, but I thought this is one concrete one that has been done already that I think would really help for the catch-up part.
Right, and the motivation and the motivation, the desire, the strategy, and the rolling out of all of this is I'm assuming is not uniform across states, or unlikely to be uniform across states.
I think though, I've been traveling a lot since schools opened, and I find that, at the school level, there is a lot of really positive energy. Kids are really happy to be back. Teachers are actually excited to be reunited with the kids. Whatever other issues may have been before COVID, I think everyone is really relishing the fact that you can be back together. Parents are highly supportive. During COVID, we've seen that in whatever form or fashion, parents have engaged with children's learning in a way that when normal times were there, you felt like the school should do the learning. And as a parent, I'll just focus on sending them to school. I think taking all of these things together, we need to really have a big push. And I believe we can have that. Different states are looking at, I think, different ways of how do you get back. But the one thing I would say that don't worry about curriculum. The curriculum is there. We right now need to focus on our children, bring them up where they feel confident that whatever has been lost has been regained quickly. There is low hanging fruit. And then we can, bring in the pace of how should we proceed once we are sure that all our kids, class 3, class 4, class 5 and beyond, are able to read fluently, able to argue with you, they are able to demand tough problems. And, we have to have faith in our kids and teachers, because I think they can do that.
Right, and I'm going to pick up another 2 points, but let me come to the parental part, and you talked about it, and I know that you've been talking about this elsewhere too, the importance of parental involvement, which was high in COVID, and which is not necessarily a negative, at least in retrospect.
Yeah, so I think that, whatever level of education or income we were in, parents had to think about what shall I do to help my kids, because there was no other help available. The school was far away. They were sending you, remotely, whatever was possible given the resources. Now, if you look at our ASR surveys from 20 and 21, phone surveys, we find that even in uneducated families, there were people helping. Of course, you don't have a smartphone, your parents are not educated, your siblings are not educated, you're at a big disadvantage. But I would say that at every level, the parental participation, the sibling participation was higher than expected. And I think that the other thing we saw is teachers reaching out from schools to connect to families was also higher than expected, because these were tough times for everyone. So I think that all of these are extra resources, extra energy which has been coming into the system, which needs to be harnessed. So, for example, Punjab has been doing mother workshops for their pre-primary school children, saying we welcome mothers to school once a month. Let us do activities together. The teachers will, enable the parents to see what things they can do at home, so that for the rest of the month you can do that. These kinds of things I think should become an integral part, so that the community or parents are not somebody you call when you want to scold them about how their children are performing, but about it is something that we say that we have extra hands and extra hearts and extra heads available to us, as we get back on this journey.
Right, and you've also working on these Mohalla committees, which or Mohalla gatherings.
Yes.
Tell us about that and how that's helping in the cause of improving children's education outcomes.
So we saw during COVID as Pratham, we were connected to almost 10,000 communities, largely rural, and where we made an appeal to anybody who was an older kid or a youth or a parent to say, could you support kids? And we made our teaching at the right level approach a very simple way that could be communicated from remote. We found overwhelming support. Our idea is that every community has, let's say, 4 or 5 sub-hamlets. And our goal was, could there be one person in each hamlet who says, I'll take care of 10, 12 children, even during COVID times, and work with them for an hour or two a day. Last year, soon after the second wave, we had a really good experience with these 10,000 villages. And right now we decided there are summer holidays everywhere. We were quite confident that young people are coming forward. And so our current Mohalla camps, which are running in close to 25,000 villages, we call them Kamal Ka Camp. Because actually Kamal is happening because you're coming forward and children are making progress. Almost 65,000 volunteers have come forward. Several states, the state governments are also lending a hand. So I think that this appeal to yesterday the Bihar education minister put out an appeal to public to say, join the campaign, help your children. And I think these appeals to me are powerful and are happening and can happen more.
Right. So, as I look back at what you're saying, Ms. Banerjee, somehow it sounds to me like COVID has almost done good because it's united so many people, segments of society. When I say segment, I mean teachers, parents, made everyone more involved. The creation of these new cohorts like these mohallas, it seems to be all for the good, rather more good has come out of it than bad.
No, I should not overplay that, this. I think COVID, as I always say, is a rakshas. It ate up many things. But I think that, it made us realize that we have more strengths than perhaps we were giving ourselves credit for. And I think that this need for collaboration, school and home, or, partners who are not normally collaborating, sharing of resources, these things we have to not let go of just because schools have opened. And I think that particularly on the parents' side, I think this last 10 years of universal, elementary education, close to universal secondary in many states, has given us resources in the family that really have to be invited in. Because, even though you may be educated, you still feel the teacher knows more than you. And I think it's up to our teachers to say, join the gang and let us do this together. Let us have doable goals. This national education policy has given us a very clear doable goal. And I think that, if you have an impossible goal, sometimes you feel like we'll never get there. But having kids at class 3, being able to read a story and debate it or discuss it with everybody around them, do simple problems, but do it confidently. The Nipun Bharat guidelines also has, instead of saying you need to be literate and numerate, they say effective communicators connected to your context. So I think sometimes the change of terminology also helps. So let's treat this as a new chapter. Between the last chapter and the new chapter, there may have been a dark period, but that dark period showed us many more cast of characters who can join me in my new chapter. And that's how I would, at least, and that's how Pratham is looking at the years ahead.
Right, and it's an interesting point because you're saying that if we've had now 10 years of almost universal primary school and in many states high intensity of secondary school participation, that those children who are now maybe tending towards adults are actually contributors to the education system in some way.
Absolutely. They are the beneficiaries and they are the contributors. And we have this idea called education for education. If I got education, what can I give back as education? And I think that could be almost like a national movement to say, Shiksha ke badle Shiksha. Mujhe Shiksha mili and I'm happy to give. And I know as a student in college or university, nobody is saying give your whole life. But an hour a day for a month every now and then, I think people are very happy to do.
Right. Okay. So as you look ahead, Ms. Banerjee, how are you stacking up, the pros and the cons of, let's say, attacking the larger education challenges that we have today? I mean, I'm still talking about K-12, and I'd also urge you to touch upon the digital hybrid angle to this and whether this has worked or not.
So number one is, I think, many different experiments had been tried during COVID. And during the lockdown period, or when, schools were closed, it was difficult often to do a very clear measurement. So again, I can speak for ourselves. We sent out phone messages on a daily basis to close to 3 or 4 lakh families at the peak. Now, these messages that we were sending out was largely to keep people engaged and to create a two-way communication. But we've recently done a little study with about 40,000 children to look at, does an SMS a day make a difference to your basic level of learning? And if somebody phones once a week and talks to your parents, does that make a difference? Because does a nudge make a difference? Does simple low-tech make a difference? And the results, we are still sort of verifying it and getting more experts to look at it. Looks like, yes, it does have a significant, not a huge, but a significant difference even in 1 month. So what I feel is, on the digital...
Just a reminder. It's just a reminder that...
It's an SMS which says, do this activity. Can you, maybe a word problem because you have 162 characters, and a reminder to parents or siblings or whoever is the owner of the phone that, did you do it? Why did you just do it with your kids? So it's a combination of a very, very simple low-tech thing with another very simple low-tech thing, which is, hi, do this activity with your kids. And we see a significant difference. And this was done just for a month in April. What I'm trying to say is that anybody and everybody who's tried some digital means, I think, owes it to themselves to go back and do a little bit of a rigorous analysis of, did it work? Because we need to move ahead with all the did it work, with all the things that worked, and get away from the things that didn't work. And I think that, again, for us, why should we not continue to send these SMS messages even when schools are open? Because it was a very good way to interact with parents, give them little ideas of what to do. And so we need to learn from the COVID experience to integrate it into our daily working. And particularly if we want families, parents, communities, siblings to be engaged, I think the remote methods must get stronger and supplemental. Nobody is saying this will replace the school or the classroom. But I think these were interesting things that helped. So how can we make them help better? So that would be my view on the digital, that let's look hard, each one, whatever you've done, at what can you contribute to a national pool of what works, and share your evidence along. Now, whole school system, Govind, I'm from Pratham. I can only talk about Prathamik. I think the problems get deeper as you get older and closer to high stakes. But I also felt like perhaps we could have done more on our examination systems, because in many ways our education system is bookended, at least on the top end, by high stakes exams. So we did do different ways of doing exams at different times, lowering the load, but I think exam reform would be a critical part of helping to transform what that secondary education and entrance to colleges. I am not a experienced person in that space, but just looking at it from the primary schools, even at class 5, people are looking at class 10 mein mujhe kya karna padega.
So how do you de-emphasize that? I mean, can you at all?
No, I'm saying that there needs to be, probably for our systems which have had these exams for many decades, you still probably need something to signify you're leaving this stage and going to the next. Firstly, do I need an exit and an entry? And I think that is being debated about whether there can be one set of. The other thing is, why can't I take an exam when I feel I'm ready? What is so sacrosanct about March or April, what a specific day? Why can't I have as many tries to get to, whatever I consider to be my best level? Why can't, an 8th standard kid, if he feels he wants to take a 10th standard test, not be allowed to do so? We have technology available now. The founder of Pratham, Madhav Chavan, has been talking about something called anytime testing machine, ATM. Why can't you have ATMs in every community in India which says, come kids and test yourself? Why should testing be such a, high stress? Yeah, exactly. And all you want to know is, what's your best level if you give it a good shot? So I think that whole, from 9th onwards, you should open up these. And, during the COVID time, we were talking to CBSE, saying, CBSE, if you voluntarily led the way in these experiments, don't make it mandatory for everyone, then we would learn a lot from it, because I believe that they have the keys to the kingdom. Whatever elite schools do, everybody wants to follow. So I think there is some onus on our elite schools also to say what are new ways of opening up this assessment space in a way that is more friendly to students and not stressful for parents or teachers.
And this has been, this is the last question as well. I mean, and this is something that is being done in other parts of the world. I mean, we could follow some examples.
Yeah, I mean, I believe that in the, in Western countries, at least in the US, you can take that, whatever that exam is to go to college, as many times as you want. And in addition, there is other things that you take with you when you go for college admission, who you are, what you did, what you think, blah, blah, blah. Maybe for, 25 million kids leaving every year, that may be very large, but in other countries it may be smaller. But I think we could devise better ways of getting to know our my own son was terrible in school and loves being at work and is very good at work. But what did he have to present to his work people to say, try me? It was like, the academic record was not good, and therefore he would have been, probably, not treated. So how do we give our young people a chance to show who they are? And I'm very affected. I see these Mahala camps. I see these kids all over India who may or may not be terribly good in their own studies, but are giving so much of themselves to younger children. And I think that's the kind of thing that counts. Asar, 30,000 young people do Asar every year. They go out into an unknown part of their district. They come back with well done. It's a little project. But how do I put all of that on my CV or college admission or job application to say, guys, treat me seriously. I'm a serious person.
Right, and that's a very positive and optimistic note to end on as well. Rukmini Banerji, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you. Bye-bye.